We apologize, but we are not getting input into the simultaneous translation booths. Now it's okay. Now we got it. It's been a long time since we wanted Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle, Archbishop of Manila, one of the most authoritative figures in the world Catholic Church. May I use this expression? And we also have Professor Philip Jenkins from the United States. He lectures in Texas. He is a historian and he deals with demography of religion, and he has a wide culture. His studies and his books, as I was commenting before to him, have the merit to open new and surprising perspectives all the time. He hasn't just addressed the future of Christianity, but also the past of it. As I said, he's a great historian. And one of his books in particular, The Lost World, is really an exceptional work going into details of a story that is not very well known, at least in our country here, that is Christianity in the East. And then there's these other volumes, The God of Europe. I like to advertise books. And then there's a brief collection of articles in the press, the new Global Church, the new map. All these books can be found at the bookshop of the meeting if you're interested. And also you can find texts by Cardinal Tagle like this one and many others. The publishing house is EMI. We have been longing for this presentation, this colloquium today with these two very important guests. Cardinal Tagle has been Archbishop of Manila since 2011. He's president of Caritas Internationalis, and he is the expression of a young, dynamic, and vibrant church, like the Philippine church, a church that we do not know very well here, perhaps because we're too much worried and bent on ourselves, focused on ourselves, on the fatigue of the West, on the tiredness of the West. We're unable to look at elsewhere. But I believe that today, in today's conference here, in this dialogue, we will be able to change our point of view. Thanks to our distinguished guest speakers, we will have access to new data, to new information, and we will feed our awareness of what really happens to our life, our setting, our culture, our tradition, and how Christianity lives in this epoch. That's basically the main question that we want to take as a starting point. How will and what will the church be in the next 2 decades? These 20 years are not far from us, because these are the years in which our children, I'm talking about my generation, are going to become adults. Some of them are already adults, and so they will become responsible, and we will give them the lead. They will have to be responsible for history. Basically, that's the horizon in which we want to define our conference here today. And I would like to invite His Eminence, Cardinal Tagle, to start addressing these questions. As I said, we have been trying to invite Cardinal Tagle many times because, well, we can't say that his life is hell because he's a cardinal, but it's really busy and really complicated. When he left Manila, he told me that there were big issues at the airport. His flight was postponed after 12 hours. Then from here, he has to go to Dublin. So it is really a great gift and a great honor to have you here today at the meeting. Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is a privilege, and I am very happy to be here at the meeting of Rimini, edition 2018. And I would like to extend the greetings of the Diocese of Manila to all of you. I would like to give a contribution with this intervention, talking about the church before change. Change of an epoch. It's not just an epoch of change, but also there is a change of epoch. Change is one of the most ordinary and normal aspects of human life. From the very beginning until the very end of every day, every person addresses change or reacts to change. Families, society, countries are in a continuous movement of change. And we can say the same thing about the international community and also of natural forces. But even if change is a constant, is a given in our life, in fact, we are not very much used to it. Some of these changes cause insecurity and a certain sense of discomfort. We wish that certain changes never occurred, but there are changes that we consider to be blessings. Change is an experience of transition from one condition or situation of life to another one. And every transition implies some risks, as well as opportunities of growth. One's birth, one's first day in school, becoming adolescent, going to the university, looking for a job, marrying, becoming priest or a nun, and retiring, becoming old or getting ill. All these are experiences of change. And this is what defines human life. There's different types of change, as much as there's different causes or settings of change. Some changes are unexpected. For example, the loss of a dear one, or the loss of a job, or the visit by a burglar over the night, or an earthquake that may cause destruction. Some changes are chosen and they are deliberately planned. Some changes are consequences of decisions and actions by us and by other people. But well beyond every type of change before us, change calls for an answer. Contemporary world change. The world has become a small global village due to social communication, economic networks, and also access to traveling. Peoples and nations contaminate each other, have a lot of exchanges rapidly and profoundly as never before in human history. Change at all levels of human life takes place in such a rapid way that we are unable to respond to it, both as individual and as a community. Pope Francis emphasized some of these changes that are posed in this turning point in history. Evangelii Gaudium, paragraph 52. The majority of changes are ambivalent insofar as they may include both negative and positive aspects. For example, the creation of well-being and productivity, but also the increasing inequality, as well as social exclusion and corruption. There is a constant call for working for the common being, but also the refusal of the ethic. There is an invitation to global security, but also at the same time there is a growing aggression and violence. We also see changes in culture, in society, in politics, and in religion. And these are seen as attacks to religious freedom, fundamentalism, individualism, secularization, indifference, relativism, and disillusion, and the return of totalitarianism in cultural imperialism, and so on and so forth. It is not surprising that we may feel overwhelmed before all this. I would like to refer now to the lack of welcoming to migrant and displaced people in a world that aims to be global. We also find barriers, we also find walls. So there is no welcoming. But the church is called to be the sign or the tool or the sacrament of the new humanity in Jesus Christ, our boss, the sacrament of communion. But how can we do it? With the Lord's grace, for sure. But we also need to respond to a world that is not welcoming the others, a world that sees a threat in the others. The other is not seen as a brother or as a sister. I come from the Philippines, Asia, and we use images rather than simple reasoning to illustrate a church that is facing change or the renovation wanted by Jesus. I would like to mention a couple of images here. First, the door of a house. The door unites what is outside with what is inside, but at the same time, it is the location of distinction between inside and outside. The renewed church takes its door into serious consideration, and the renewed church is a door. Through the door, the grace of Christian faith, of worship, and of service can spread in the world, but through the door, the mystery of the presence of the Spirit in the world is taken to the church, and it is brought especially by the faithful. We tell the history of Jesus to the world with our narratives, while we listen to the stories of the world with our compassionate door, with the compassionate door of Jesus' heart. I'll tell you a story. There is a lady who works for Caritas in Lebanon, and she is involved with illegal migrants that are detained, and she told me about an experience that she had in Syria when she attended a conference. She got a taxi, and before getting to her destination, she asked the taxi driver how much he was going to charge. And he answered, she didn't need to. And she said that she had some money, but the driver said, I don't accept money from Caritas. The lady was surprised, and she inquired how he could understand that she belongs to Caritas. And the taxi driver said, 3 years ago, I was imprisoned in Lebanon as I was an illegal migrant. And I saw you there. One night I was ill, and the guards refused to give me treatment. On that moment, you came by, and I asked for treatment to you, and you gave it to me. That night, I could sleep nicely, and I've always thought about this. For 3 years, the face of that lady from Caritas was fixed in the memory of that man. The church has changed, and the church is renewed when the gospel and the sigh of the world can meet at its door. Now, the other image I want to talk about. Sitting, yes, I can say sitting at the table. The Asians love to eat, just like Italian people. And eating is not just a matter of food, but there is this idea of gathering in a community, in a family, and a table is ready when there's food and human stories that feed friendship and solidarity. A renewed church can be compared to a big table where there is a place for everybody, and a table where the goods and the resources of the earth must be shared, especially with the poor. A table where people who have nothing to eat and have nobody to share a meal with, they can have a seat too. Around this table, the church has changed, and the church is renewed by the spirit of reciprocal participation, mutual participation, interdependence, and co-responsibility. One day I was with a friend in his car, and we went to visit a place in an area of Metro Manila. Along the road, the traffic light turned red, and so we had to stop. All of a sudden, there were street sellers selling flowers, biscuits, and sweets, walking around the cars at the traffic light. Our driver told the street sellers that we didn't want to buy anything. And so they went to the cars behind us. And all of a sudden, one of them that was selling biscuits came back, running towards our car, and he was calling up to me, "Cardinal, Cardinal." And the driver and my friend repeated that we didn't want to buy anything, but the seller kept calling me, showing me his biscuits. Without the authorization of my friend who owned the car, I put the window down and I greeted that man, and the driver repeated kindly that we didn't want to buy anything. But the seller said, "I'm not selling these cookies. I want to offer them to the cardinal. It is a gift." This poor person that was in need of every single penny to live was ready to give up his profit to be able to offer his simple gift to his bishop. A new church exploded before my eyes, and showing the power of the wounded, of the last ones, in offering the gospel of communion and inclusion. I'm about to finish, don't worry. The last image. Building a new life. Different cultures in Asia have a long tradition in celebrating funerals. There is extended time that is used to celebrate and grieve one's dead. And this is slow in order to get back to rejoin life. Grievance, mourning, can help us get detached from life to be able to get back to our things. So the good of the past is taken to the present and to the future. The church lives through the tradition transmitted with the gospel. The gospel is eternal because Christ is eternal. But Christ is the source of novelty. And the gospel is not a museum of the past, but the life supporting the church in every historical moment, place, and culture. Standing still on certain sociological and cultural form from another time or from another place, as if they looked like the eternal gospel, could be a choice that would diminish the church instead of strengthening it. Just like the gospel, the Holy Spirit, we want to be brave and put aside projects and ideas that many times make us confused. We think it is about the gospel, but we want to be open to surprise, to poetry, and to the stories that God has for the church. Evangelii Gaudium 22, the last story. In a summer camp for young people, I spoke at a conference for half an hour on how to find one's aim in one's life. And then I invited the audience to ask questions. The first question was asked by a young lady who said, "Bishop, would you sing for us?" And I immediately answered, "Ask sensible questions, and then I will sing for you." There were many more questions, and then a young boy asked, "So now, would you sing for us?" I invited them to sing a folk song together with me. And after singing, they came to me to ask for benediction. They wanted to touch me. They wanted to take a picture, to take a selfie. and an autograph on their books and also on their T-shirts. That event was a mystery for me. What was going on? Did I behave well, as a bishop should? What do these young people think of me? Am I an actor? I'm a bishop. 1 year after that, I got a response. In a similar summer camp, a young person approached me and said, "Last year, you signed my T-shirt, and since then, I haven't washed it." 1 year. 1 year. But this young person said, "Every night I fold it and I put it under my pillow. I haven't seen my father for many years. With that T-shirt under my pillow, I know that I have a family in the church and I have a father in you." How many young people are looking for a father, for a mother? The eternal gospel is announced in the form of a signed teacher. The teacher was signed by a bishop for a young man who is longing for a family and for a father. An astonishing aspect, but a very good one of a renewed church. Thank you. Thank you so much. Professor Philip Jenkins lectures at the University of Baylor in Texas. And as I said, he is a historian. He studies religion and demography. He applies criteria that are used in demographic studies to develop more detailed knowledge of the religions, of their development, of their size in the future. He wrote several books. Some of them are available in Italian and are published by the EMI Publishing House, as I said before. We were really looking forward to having him at the meeting because his studies, his work is really revealing on what the church will be like. When we think about the future, well, we reflect upon what we are now. Thank you, Professor. You have the floor.
Please excuse me. I will be speaking in English. All ages are ages of change. I would be suggesting that we live today in an age of greater changes than the Reformation. However, some things remain the same. One of the things that remains the same is people are always predicting the end, the ruin of Christianity, especially in Europe. Christianity was about to end in 1800. Christianity was about to end in 1640, at the time of the Great Wars of Religion. At that time, St. Vincent de Paul said something very important. He said, people think Christianity will end, but no. Jesus said his church would last till the end of time. He never mentioned the word Europe. The church of the future, he said, will be the church of China, of Japan, of Africa, and of Latin America. And I put it to you, that was a prophecy that has come true in our lifetimes. We live in an age of historic change. Some years ago, a learned American society listed the countries that soon would have no religion whatever. And they listed countries like Australia and Canada and Austria and Ireland. They seem to be frightening times. But then you look around the world and you see everywhere growth. Of course the church is changing. It is evolving. But that is what makes a living being. It grows, it breathes, and that is what we are seeing. I do not want to give too many numbers, but there are some that I cannot avoid. I will focus on what is today perhaps the most exciting part of the Christian story. I will talk about Africa as one example. Back in 1900, there were 10 million Christians of all denominations in Africa. Today, there are 500 million. By 2050, there will be 1 billion Christians in Africa. That is the greatest quantitative, numerical change that has ever happened in the history of religion, and we are living through it today. I will tell you the story of Christianity. Christianity is a religion that was born in parts of Asia and Africa. And in our lives, that religion has decided to go home. Back in 1900, over 80% of the world's Christians lived in Europe and North America. By 2050, that number will be 27%. Christianity has become the greatest, by far the greatest, global religion. I'm speaking of Christianity generally. Let me speak of the Catholic Church. The Catholic story is more dramatic than the larger Christian story. In 1900, Africa had less than 2 million Christians. Today, there are over 200 million. By 2050, there will be 460 million Catholics in Africa. There will be many milestones, many markers. By 2030, there will be more Christians in Africa, more Catholics than in Africa than in Europe. You may be asking here, are these figures reliable? And in some ways, they are not. Let me tell you why. At my own university in Baylor, we have people who go and do research, and they ask people, what is your religion? In African countries, something very consistent, very remarkable happens. The number of people who claim to be Catholic, who describe themselves as Catholic, is much larger than the number that the church knows about. The Catholic Church is undercounting 20% of its membership in Africa. Why does this happen? They are far too busy baptizing people to count them. It is that sort of time of change. That is a heart of the story, but not the sole story. Around the world, Christianity is moving from its European heartland to Africa, Asia, Latin America. If I look at the Catholic Church, back in 1900, something like 66% of Catholics lived in Europe. By 2050, that number will go from 66% to 16%. But those European Catholics will include many who were African in origin, Latin American in origin. We live in a global church. For me, this is the greatest change in Christianity, perhaps apart from the Reformation. It's in that league. Do you want to see the Catholic world as it will be in 2050? What are the largest countries? Still, Brazil, Mexico, the Philippines. And there will even be 2 European countries, France and Italy. But otherwise, all the expansion is African. Nigeria, the Congo, Uganda, a church of all races, of all peoples. It is almost a biblical vision. We can tell this story in many ways. We can tell it in terms of conversions, and there are many conversions. But a large part of the lesson is the phrase that is behind me there. The forces that move history. What are the forces that move history? They are what make people happy. Family, love, children. When scientists study this, they call it the study of demography, of population. Here is the most important story in the world today, perhaps, in the secular world and the religious. People in the global north, in Europe especially, are having fewer and fewer children. People in the global south, in Africa, in Asia, are having larger numbers of children. Those rates, those changes are very closely related to the actual amount, the commitment to religion. And this is a very important lesson that perhaps not enough people know. In many older societies, we look at the number of children that a woman has in her lifetime. We call this the fertility rate. If the rate is 2.1 children per woman, then that is a stable population. If it is much higher, then that is a growing young population and a very religious population. If it is a low rate, then society becomes more secular, less religious. Europe in the 1960s began a historic revolution of having smaller and smaller families. In Italy and Spain, for example, the rate now is about 1.4 children per woman. Society becomes older, it becomes more stable. People look at a country like Denmark, which may have 1.3 children per woman. Why that is connected with being less religious, I'm not sure. It is perhaps when you take children out of the story, then there are fewer ways in which people are connected to the church and to society. They no longer send them to religious schools, First Communion classes. I'm not sure. But if you tell me what a fertility rate is in a society, I can go a long way to tell you how religious it is, how secular it is, and what its laws will be on many things, like same-sex marriage and like abortion. And that may sound like a strange kind of sociological magic, but it does work. Oh, and this is the other important thing, which is so important and which few people know. Those rates are declining very fast in many countries around the world and becoming more secular. Do you know where the countries are with the fastest declining rates? They're no longer in Europe. They're in countries like India, Iran, Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia. Secularization is going to hit many countries around the world, and they have not yet thought of the consequences. Can you imagine a time when Iran will be as secular as any European country? But some countries around the world are growing very fast in their fertility rates, remaining very religious. These are the most religious countries in the world. At the risk of giving torture to the translators, I will give you some examples. I look at a country like Nigeria, for example, which soon will be one of the world's greatest Christian countries. In 1900, there were 180,000 Christians out of a population of 16 million. By 2050, there will be 400 million Nigerians, of whom 180 million will be Christians. That is a growth rate of 1,000. When I talk to people and they talk about the growth of their churches, I say, look very hard at Africa and you will see a very, very high standard of growth. Ethiopia had 12 million people in 1900. It will have 200 million by 2050. The number of Christians in Ethiopia will grow in that time from 6 million to 100 million. Where will these people live? And the answer is, a great many of them will travel to those aging societies, the societies where there are not enough people to do the work and pay the taxes. They will come to Europe. They will come to the United States. There will be Muslims and there will be Christians. There will be tens of millions of new and very passionate, very sincere Christians. This is one of the most important changes in Christian history. And we can talk about so many places in the world and look at these immigrants. You look at an area like the Arab Gulf, the countries like Kuwait and Bahrain, countries that traditionally were all Muslim. Now they have very large Christian populations because of migration. They did not choose to erect walls against migrants. Those countries now have Christian populations of 10% or 15% at least. So what are the forces that make people happy? They are those of family and children and love, of what we call demography. Demography is driving changes on an unprecedented, inconceivable scale. And when you look at claims that Christianity is dying or failing around the world, a social scientist would laugh and say, you're paying no attention to the numbers. Some countries will be more secular. Japan, for instance, will be a very secular country. Some Muslim countries may be secular, but the Christian world is a very rapidly expanding creature. I do not claim this as the only story in growth in the world, but it is one of the most remarkable. I can give you many examples of particular churches, but I will tell you of one because it solves one of the great historical mysteries that perhaps you have worried about. If I look at the nation of Ukraine, I see a Christian leader by the name of Sunday Adelaja. Sunday Adelaja is a Nigerian who in 1992 came to the old Soviet Union, and he built a church with originally a very small number of people. That church grew very fast. It had Nigerian leaders, but mainly white European followers. Today, there are probably 100,000 members in that church, which is one of the largest in Europe. And you may ask a question, which is, how does a church accommodate 100,000 people? Where do you put them? But there is an easy answer. The Ukraine was for many years part of the Soviet Union. It was a communist country, and it built great buildings for Communist Party gatherings. So if you have ever wondered what was the historical function of communism, it was to build churches large enough for African Pentecostal churches. So when people try and predict if you have traveled anywhere in other parts of Europe, you have seen churches like this. If you have been to London, if you have been to Paris, you have seen Nigerian churches. I have had Nigerian friends tell me that when the first American spaceship lands on Venus, there will be Nigerians there waiting to sell them things. And there will soon be a Nigerian church. So I will just use one quote, if I may. There was, sorry. Some people read notes very carefully, some make good notes and lose them. I lose them. So when we look at religious trends, any suggestion of the Catholic Church, the Christian Church, dying is wildly wrong. But this is not the first time that people have said this. Back in the 1890s, the writer Mark Twain said, "In this world, we have seen the Roman Catholic power dying for many, many centuries. Many a time we have got ready for the funeral, and it has been postponed again, perhaps on account of the weather. One of the most uncertain things in the world is the death of a religion. So we can make plans to meet at the graveside of the church, but we will have a very long wait." Thank you.
Bene, grazie.
Thank you, Professor. I mentioned that new knowledge and new data would have been mentioned in the presentations and changes in perspectives. Some time ago, when I started reading your studies, I got so surprised because we took many things for granted, but that's not the case. So now I would like to ask a question to His Eminence. What do these new Christianities bring to us? The professor said that in a certain sense Christianity is going back home because it was generated in Africa and in Asia. In one of your books you mentioned the Asian face of Jesus. So what is the face, what is the aspect of this new Christianity, of this Catholic Church that is changing so rapidly? We have heard that in a few years there will be almost 500 million Catholic people. I can answer in Italian, in English, but I can speak and I will listen to a lady's voice. Well, we also have a gentleman's voice, if you like. I will try and speak in Italian. During the Synod of the Bishops for Asia in 1998, that was summoned by John Paul II, I was a simple priest. I was not bishop at that time. And I took part in the event as a member of the General Secretariat of the Synod. And one day, Pope John Paul II, after praying, stood up and looking at the Asian bishops in the eye, he said, Jesus our Lord was born in Asia. The church was born in Asia. And from Asia, it has been traveling around all over the world. So the face of Jesus our Lord is an Asian face. This is not an abstract matter. For example, when we read the Gospel, the way Jesus Christ speaks is not with concepts, but it is with stories. And that's a very Asian thing. To gather the disciples, he does not organize a seminar or a colloquium. He sets up a party with food. In our parishes, when we need to gather young people and not for a seminar, we say there is a big meal open to everybody. There's 20,000 people showing up, 20,000 people. And during the meal, little by little, we do not just share food, but we also share our life stories and the story of Jesus Christ. And this simple face, this simple aspect, little by little, for the Christians in Africa, in Asia, and in South America, is affected by the cultural, national, local experience of these churches. But it is the same gospel. I was in Nigeria, and I could not understand the language of the Mass, but I knew about it. I knew it was the same Eucharist. I knew it was the same gospel. It was just spoken in an African way. For example, in the Roman Rite, the deacon holds the gospel solemnly. But in Nairobi, in Kenya, in Abuja, there is not a deacon there, just a lay person, a nun, holds the book of the gospel on top of her head. And she does not walk solemnly, she just dances with joy. It is the same kind of procession, but with an African twist. Oh, thank you so much. My simple take-home message is this. Indeed, there is a conceptual content. However, to understand the different faces, so to say, of the church, of the only gospel, we have to experiment. And we have to experience firsthand these faces, to see them, to listen to them. And there is a profound link. It is just the grace of the Holy Spirit, of the communion, of the solidarity. Professor, let us now focus on Europe and on Italy. You talked about these prospects of Africa and Asia, but we are always a little bit worried. Maybe, as you said at the beginning, we are too much worried. We're too much focused on ourselves. But the same then Cardinal Ratzinger, years ago before becoming Pope, mentioned that time will come when there won't be enough people to fill the beautiful churches that were built in Europe. Just the opposite of what is happening with the communist buildings that are being filled by the Nigerian churches. Well, it is a very diverse and colorful and wonderful world, also because of this. But how would you interpret this phenomenon? This phenomenon of the decrease of Christianity in this continent that, after all, has been an historical cradle for that.
Some years ago, I wrote the book, God's Continent, Il Dio di Europa. And it was, when I told people I was writing a book about religion in Europe, everyone said, it must be a very short book. And immediately I said, no, no, no. It is changing. So you have immigrant Christianity, but you also have, very good, you also have the Christianity of older established populations in new forms. So Europe no longer lives in its old peasant societies where you could expect that everyone in a village would attend church every week. As cities grew larger, as society became more complex, so structures changed. The core remained, but the structures changed over time. It would be amazing if they didn't. What I have seen in many churches in the last few years is how they have adapted to new societies, not the old mass societies. What I write about is the new ecclesial movements in the Catholic Church. I write about the Alpha Course in the Church of England, ways of speaking to a society with very different ideas of work and family. So it might be in 10 or 20 years, there will be a Nigerian church here, and there'll be a very traditional, old stock European church here, and they will live in peace and charity and work together and share things, but they're both totally Christian and totally Catholic. And I would add one thing, which is one thing that amazes me about Europe is the strength of spiritual belief, even if disconnected from an institutional church. The popularity of pilgrimage, the growth of new pilgrimages in Europe, I think is one of the most powerful statements of faith that is not dying, it is growing. So I use these words of growth and evolution. If an animal is not growing and evolving, it is dead. Mm-hmm. European Christianity is not dying, it is evolving, it is changing. And I see that as a very positive lesson for everyone. It is positive for the church, and it is even positive for we writers who get to write about it and write books. It's all good news.
Yeah. Scusi, torno ancora da lei un attimo.
Back to you again to then conclude with His Eminence. Because there is a book that really astonished me, The Lost History of Christianity, the golden millennium of Christianity in the East. It's really an incredible book. I recommend it to you. It is the rediscovery of an almost unknown story. It is the history of the expansion of Christianity and of the great spread of Christianity between the 5th and the 15th century towards Asia. There were even structures of Eastern churches that used to have 300, 400, 500 dioceses, even much bigger than those we had in Europe. And it is truly a lost history. That's the title of the book. And you say something that is really worrying, that's quite strong, that civilization, that religions can be erased, can be cancelled. This really impressed me. So we are not totally safe. We cannot say that we can avoid this risk in the concrete history. We also feel a sense of participation in the many problems experienced by Christian communities in the Middle East. That's not a question of demography, it's a question of geopolitics and conflicts, but there's this sense of urgency and discomfort for what we see in many parts of the world. Maybe because of self-extinction or because of conflicts, Christianity indeed is running the risk of disappearing, or that's just our perception, maybe.
Sure. Can Christianity disappear? Can Christianity disappear in some parts of the world? Yes, but it is a religion that is always dying and always being born. And if there is a central truth here, it is resurrection. Resurrection is the history of Christianity. And okay, it's not just a theological doctrine. It is an observable historical fact. Christianity dies and Christianity is reborn, but perhaps the people who see the sun rise are not the same who see it go down. But we must have a very long time frame. I look at all the times that Christianity has been destroyed in China, never to rise again. 5 times so far that I can think of. Today, Christianity is far stronger in China than it has ever been in the past. It has died 4 times, and now it is resurrected again. If I live to be 1,000 years old, perhaps I can answer your question.
Beh, se però Lo spererei perché così
Well, I wish you did, so that your books could continue this life of ours, this history of ours. Well, I'm always very, very intrigued and interested by what you say and what you read in your interviews, and also in the other book that I mentioned. You said that maybe in 2050, the most Christian country in the world, in terms of number of populations, will be China itself. That's really an astonishing information for me. We don't normally think about these things, but you do help us to change our point of view and perhaps to become more aware of the issues that you have mentioned. It's really fundamental that death is followed by resurrection. There is constant transformation, and this is evidence of vitality and vibrancy. So, His Eminence, to conclude our conference here, I would like to go back to this theme. In Europe and in Italy, the cradle of Christianity, we used to live as if we were now in a decreasing parable in terms of the habits, in terms of laws. In many occasions, we talk about things that have been supporting our social life and are now about to dissolve. They are disappearing. One of the big issues that you mentioned is welcoming the others, accepting the others. It is incredible what is going on in Europe with its Christian roots in this respect, in integrating the others, welcoming the others. So what do you think about this parable of the European Christianity, and what do you think about it from your point of view, coming from a church that is increasing? I am actually not an expert in the history of the great church in Europe, but I can tell you this. Over the last 3-4 years, I have heard a remark many, many times. That is, the church in Italy has become old. It is tired, and so on and so forth. It is tired. But I would like to ask you a question. Tired of what? Because when people repeat, just like a refrain, a slogan, we're old, we're tired, such a repetition becomes a reality. Because we take something that we think of and we make it real. From a certain point of view, this may be partly the case in this observation, whereby the church in Europe has got old and so on, because the situation that was in place some years ago is not in place anymore. However, what I think is also that we need to be able to spot, to recognize the signs of youth. For example, in Milan, a Sunday service was celebrated by Cardinal Scola, and he invited me to there with 20,000 Filipinos in one mass. So the church is not old, the church is not tired, the church lives. But where is it? In the migrant. So the question is, are the migrants included in the vision of the church? If they are, well, the church is not tired at all. It is truly young. However, when these are excluded, the church is old indeed. It is tired. So it is a different view. I can give you another example. In Australia, a priest in a parish near Melbourne told me this: I do really appreciate the Filipino community in my parish. They're such an active community. They participate in the choir, in the liturgical choir. They are part of charismatic movements, etc. And I said, thanks to God. And then he said, but I have an observation to make. You Filipino, you do not have the sense of liturgical Advent. And I wonder why. Because the Filipino choir starts singing songs, Christmas songs, on the first day of the Advent. Immediately, it's Christmas time without Advent. But that's because in the Philippines, Christmas starts on the 1st of September. On the 1st of September, there you go, Christmas songs and stars and discounts in the shops. Everything starts. And the Filipino, they all bring this cheerful and Christmas spirits everywhere and rapidly. We don't really want to wait. It's already Christmas. And little by little, the Australian church is being Filipinized. But to me, history goes on and on. My mom's father was born in China. He was a migrant due to poverty. He migrated to the Philippines, and he was raised in the Philippines, and he converted from Buddhism to Christianity in the Philippines, and he met my grandmother there, and they had 9 children. The third is my mother. He did not have a notion of clergy. As soon as I entered the seminary, I talked to my grandfather and said, I want to become a priest. And he said, priest? What is a priest? I didn't really imagine I could have a priest as one of my nephews, a seminarist. And I was so sad because I wanted to have the blessing of my grandfather. But at the end of this exchange, he said, well, if you want to become a priest, I want a good priest. I want a good priest. I don't understand this status, this state of life, but I want a good nephew, a good priest. This was a poor migrant from China, and he contributed not just to the Philippines, but also to the church. A priest and now a cardinal. Unfortunately. Very well. I would like to close this session with this kind of hope, the hope that you, His Eminence, and Professor Jenkins may come back next year to the meeting to open our heart and our mind once again, to give us new perspectives, new points of view, because that's what we need to hear. We need to look at the world with a new set of eyes, a new set of lenses. And today, we could really experience this new sight, this new look. So once again, I invite you all to visit the bookshop and have a look at the very interesting books that they published. Thank you, His Eminence, for being here with us in your very, very busy schedule. So if you do make it next year, we will find a way to have a more comfortable journey. And the same goes to Professor Jenkins. I thank you so much. There is actually one more session for those who may be interested in the audience at 7 p.m. at the Spazio Cammini area. So this session is now over. There's going to be another session in this hall, and please remember that this is possible to the total gratuity of the meeting, and there's different desks where you can support the meeting financially. Please thank you, our guests. Thank you so much.